The rain drummed steadily against the windshield as Marcus pulled their silver sedan into the gravel lot of Miller's gas station. The wipers swept back and forth in a hypnotic rhythm, clearing the water just long enough for Sarah to glimpse the weathered sign hanging above the single row of fuel pumps. The neon letters flickered weakly in the gray afternoon light, casting an eerie glow across the puddles forming in the cracked asphalt. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in the passenger seat, her hands resting protectively over her rounded belly. At 8 months pregnant, every bump in the road had become a small torture, and the 3-hour drive from their penthouse in the city had left her back aching and her feet swollen. She watched Marcus through tired eyes as he drummed his fingers impatiently against the steering wheel, his jaw tight with barely contained frustration. "I need to use the restroom," Sarah said softly, her voice barely audible above the rain. "The baby's been pressing on my bladder for the last hour." Marcus didn't look at her. His expensive suit remained perfectly pressed despite the long drive, his dark hair styled just as meticulously as it had been when they left that morning. Even now, in this remote place miles from civilization, he maintained the polished appearance that had helped him build his fortune in real estate development. "Make it quick," he replied curtly, his eyes fixed on his phone screen. "I want to reach the resort before dark. The GPS shows another 2 hours of driving through these back roads." Sarah nodded and reached for the door handle, pausing as a particularly strong contraction rippled across her abdomen. She had been having them on and off for the past week, but drive. Martinez had assured her they were just practice contractions. Still, this one felt different somehow, stronger and more insistent than the others. "Are you getting out or not?" Marcus snapped, still not looking at her. "Time is money, Sarah. The Hendersons are expecting us for dinner, and I can't afford to keep potential investors waiting." With considerable effort, Sarah pushed open the car door and stepped into the cold rain. The drops felt like tiny needles against her skin, soaking through her white maternity dress within seconds. She moved carefully across the uneven gravel, one hand supporting her lower back and the other holding onto her belly as another contraction began to build. The gas station was a relic from another era, with its single-service bay and hand-painted signs advertising ice-cold sodas and fresh coffee. An elderly man in coveralls emerged from behind the counter as she pushed through the glass door, his weathered face creasing into a concerned smile. "Afternoon, miss. You look like you could use somewhere dry to rest for a spell," he said kindly, gesturing toward a small seating area with worn vinyl chairs. "Restrooms just back there through that door." "Thank you," Sarah managed, grateful for his gentle tone after Marcus's harsh words. As she made her way to the restroom, she caught sight of herself in the mirror above the sink. Her blonde hair hung in damp strands around her face, and her usually bright blue eyes looked hollow with exhaustion. The white dress clung to her swollen form, emphasizing just how close she was to her due date. Another contraction hit as she washed her hands, this one strong enough to make her grip the edge of the sink. She closed her eyes and breathed slowly, counting the seconds until it passed. 15 seconds. 20. The books said early labor contractions usually lasted less than a minute, but they were also supposed to be much further apart than this. When she returned to the main area of the gas station, the elderly attendant was restocking a display of road maps near the register. His name tag read, Frank, and his kind eyes reminded her of her grandfather, who had passed away the previous spring. "Everything all right, dear?" Frank asked, noticing how she moved with one hand pressed against her side. "I think so," Sarah replied, though uncertainty colored her voice. "Just some discomfort from the long drive." Through the rain-streaked windows, she could see Marcus pacing beside their car, his phone pressed to his ear. Even from this distance, she could tell by his animated gestures that he was deep in conversation about business. It had been the same story throughout her entire pregnancy. Board meetings, conference calls, site visits, and networking events had taken priority over doctor's appointments, birthing classes, and preparing the nursery. The bell above the door chimed as Marcus pushed inside, shaking droplets from his suit jacket. His dark eyes swept impatiently around the small space before settling on Sarah. "What's taking so long?" he demanded. "I just got off the phone with Richardson. He's flying in from Chicago tonight specifically to discuss the downtown project. This weekend could secure the financing for the entire development." "I'm ready," Sarah said quietly, though another contraction was beginning to tighten across her middle. She started toward the door, but Frank gently caught her elbow. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me saying, you look like you might be having some labor pains," the old man said in a low voice. "My wife had 6 babies, and I recognize that look. Maybe you should consider heading to a hospital instead of continuing your trip." Marcus overheard and stepped forward aggressively. She's not due for another month. Those are just false labor pains. Every pregnant woman gets them. He looked at Frank with barely concealed disdain. I hardly think a gas station attendant is qualified to give medical advice. Frank's expression remained calm, but Sarah caught the flash of disapproval in his eyes. I'm just concerned about the young lady's well-being, sir. This storm's supposed to get worse, and we're pretty isolated out here. We'll be fine, Marcus replied dismissively, already heading for the door. Sarah, let's go. We're already behind schedule. The next contraction hit just as Sarah reached the car, this one so intense that she had to stop and lean against the hood. She felt a sudden wetness between her legs and looked down in shock to see clear fluid running down her thighs. Marcus, she called urgently, her voice tight with panic. I think my water just broke. Her husband paused with his hand on the driver's side door, his face a mask of annoyance rather than concern. For a moment, the only sound was the steady patter of rain on metal and the distant rumble of thunder. It's probably just the rain, he said finally. You're soaked through. Get in the car. No, Marcus, this is different. The baby's coming. I can feel it. Sarah's voice rose with desperation as another contraction gripped her, stronger than any of the others. We need to get to a hospital. Please. Marcus stood perfectly still in the rain, his expensive shoes getting muddy in the gravel parking lot. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold and calculating. I've worked for 3 years to set up this weekend. The Henderson deal alone is worth $50 million. I can't throw that away because you're having a panic attack. This isn't a panic attack, Sarah gasped, doubling over as the pain intensified. The baby is coming now. Today. I need help. For a long moment, Marcus stared at her with an expression she had never seen before. It wasn't anger or frustration, but something much worse. It was the look of a man performing a cost-benefit analysis. Weighing her emergency against his business opportunity. The resort has excellent medical facilities, he said finally. World-class spa services, including massage therapy and relaxation treatments. You'll be more comfortable there than in some rural emergency room. Marcus, please, Sarah begged, tears mixing with rainwater on her cheeks. I'm scared. Something's wrong. The contractions are too close together, too strong. But her husband was already getting into the car, starting the engine with a roar that echoed off the gas station walls. Sarah stumbled toward the passenger door, but Marcus was faster. The car lurched forward just as she reached for the handle, gravel spraying from under the tires. She stood frozen in disbelief as the silver sedan pulled onto the empty highway, its taillights disappearing into the gray curtain of rain. The sound of the engine faded until there was nothing left but the steady drumming of water on pavement and her own ragged breathing. Another contraction doubled her over, and this time Sarah knew with absolute certainty that her baby was coming whether she was ready or not. She turned back toward the gas station, where Frank stood silhouetted in the doorway, his face etched with concern and quiet outrage. Let's get you inside, dear, he said gently, taking her arm to support her. My truck's got 4-wheel drive, and I know these roads like the back of my hand. County hospital's only about 20 minutes if we take the back way through Miller's Creek. As Frank helped her into the warmth of the gas station, Sarah felt something shift inside her that had nothing to do with the baby. For months, she had made excuses for Marcus's behavior, telling herself that his work stress was temporary, that he would change once the baby arrived. But standing abandoned in the rain, feeling her child preparing to enter the world, she finally understood the truth. The man who had just driven away wasn't the father her baby deserved. He wasn't the partner she needed. And for the first time in years, that realization brought her not despair, but a strange sense of peace. Frank was already on the phone with emergency services, his calm voice requesting an ambulance to meet them halfway to the hospital. As Sarah settled into the passenger seat of his old pickup truck, she placed both hands over her belly and whispered a promise to the life growing inside her. It's going to be just you and me, little one, she said softly. But we're going to be just fine.